During mid to late 1997, the WWF went a little overboard with factions, gangs and stables. It's been said that Vince McMahon isn't a fan of stables in wrestling, but for whatever reason, a serious amount of time was dedicated to groups as 1997 continued on. By the time November came around, we had 6 factions in the World Wrestling Federation. We had D-Generation X, the Hart Foundation, the Nation of Domination, the Disciples of Apocalypse, Los Boricuas, and the Truth Commission. The battle between those last 4 groups were known as the Gang Wars, and while the Harts and DX would get involved with the Gang Wars eventually, it was really the Nation, the Boricuas, DOA, and to a certain extent the Truth Commission who had the main chunk of the story. Today's video will look at these battling factions in the Gang Wars of 1997, and this video was requested by Patreon supporter George Cox. I've already spoke in depth about the Nation of Domination, but in order to understand the other groups involved in this storyline, then we need to take a look at how the Nation of Domination fell apart. Well, at least the original Nation of Domination. Nation leader Faarooq got a big opportunity at the 1997 King of the Ring when he faced The Undertaker for the WWF Championship. At this point, the Nation consisted of Faarooq, Savio Vega, Crush, Clarence Mason and D'Lo Brown. The team had been heavily featured on WWF programming, but championship belts had eluded the faction as a whole. So Faarooq getting a shot at The Undertaker's world title was quite a big deal. In the end, Savio and Crush began arguing on the outside of the ring. Faarooq tried to restore order, but this effectively led to The Undertaker winning the match. The next night on Raw, the Nation of Domination would go through some changes. Faarooq, Savio and Crush opened up the show with a match against the Legion of Doom and Ahmed Johnson, and you could tell that Savio and Crush weren't very enthusiastic about the match. After having another argument on the outside of the ring, Crush and Savio decided to walk away from the bout while Faarooq took another loss. A little later on, the group argued inside their locker room. Faarooq said he's going to the ring right now to address this whole messy situation, and Crush and Savio seemed a little annoyed about the conversation that just took place. Jim Ross interviews Faarooq, and the Nation's leader says that when he found Savio Vega, he was picking jalapeno peppers in a field. Faarooq brought Savio to the big time, and what happens? Vega stabs him in the back. As for Crush, he was coasting along doing absolutely nothing in the WWF until Faarooq came along and gave him purpose, and he too stabbed Faarooq in the back. Crush and Savio were then officially kicked out of the Nation of Domination. Faarooq turns his attention to the Nation's entourage and he fires them too, saying that these guys have never taken a bump, so they gotta go. The last guy Faarooq fires is Clarence Mason, so the Nation now only consists of D'Lo and Faarooq. Faarooq then promises that a new, stronger and more loyal Nation will be revealed next week on Monday Night Raw. The next week then, Faarooq said there's going to be 2 new, bigger, better, badder and blacker members of the Nation added during tonight's main event. The last match of the evening featured The Undertaker and Ahmed Johnson taking on Faarooq and a new member of the Nation, and it was revealed that Kama was the latest addition to the faction. Just before Raw went off the air, it was revealed that Ahmed Johnson was the second new member when he attacked The Undertaker. And so this was supposed to be the new Nation of Domination that would take part in the Gang Wars storyline. The following week, Ahmed explained that he joined the Nation because the fans of the World Wrestling Federation and Vince McMahon didn't get behind him when he returned from injury. He didn't get a shot at the WWF Championship, and the only people who backed him up behind the scenes were Faarooq and the Nation. Just then, Crush and a group of guys entered the arena riding motorcycles. We had Crush, Brian Lee, who was now known as Chains, and the Harris brothers, now known as Skull and 8-Ball. Crush introduces this new faction as a real brotherhood. These guys are known as the DOA, Disciples of Apocalypse. They live together, they ride together, and they fight together. A brawl breaks out between Crush's new faction and Faarooq's new Nation, and what's noteworthy here is that Ahmed Johnson managed to re-injure himself during this fight. Later in the evening, Faarooq and D'Lo had a match with The Undertaker and Vader, and the DOA came out again to attack the Nation. The following week, on the June 30th episode of Raw, Savio Vega's faction was revealed, Los Boricuas. The Boricuas consisted of wrestlers from Puerto Rico, and the group included leaders Savio Vega, Miguel Perez Jr., Jose Estrada Jr., and Jesus Castillo. Los Boricuas had a brawl here with the Nation, and the DOA also showed up, leading to all three teams fighting inside the ring. Security guards were forced to get inside the ropes to break things up, and fans now understood the direction the WWF were going in here. The DOA and Los Boricuas were formed by former Nation of Domination members, and the leaders of both respective teams wanted to get some revenge on Faarooq and his new nation. On paper, it sounds pretty good, but we gotta be honest here too. Savio Vega and Crush were never billed as main event superstars. They were seen as mid-card or even lower mid-card wrestlers, and so their factions also felt like lower tier groups just by association. Add in the fact that many of these guys in the DOA and Los Boricuas were unknown to casual wrestling fans. The best factions always featured superstars that were already established. The WWF kinda went the other way when bringing in DOA and the Boricuas, and this meant that the Nation already looked better just by default. That's not to say that wrestling fans didn't know who the Harris brothers were or who Miguel Perez Jr. and Jose Estrada were, but by and large, to casual wrestling fans, they were unproven WWF newcomers. The DOA and Los Boricuas wouldn't team up to take out the Nation. These two factions would also fight among themselves, even though both teams had formed under the same circumstances. Savio Vega had a match against Crush on the July 7th episode of Raw, and it ended in another brawl. DOA and the Boricuas had a big old fight on the outside of the ring. On the same evening, the Nation were defeated by the Hart Foundation, and that match too ended with a brawl outside the ring. Clearly, these kind of gang fights were what the WWF thought people wanted to see, and this stuff would continue for quite a long time. Even if a faction was involved in a match with people completely unrelated to the Gang Wars story, there would still be interference from a rival group, meaning that the Nation, the DOA and the Boricuas were locked into this rivalry for the long run. And if all that wasn't enough, it was announced that another faction would be making their debut on the July 28th, 1997 episode of Raw. This group was known as the Truth Commission. The Truth Commission has quite an interesting history. Their manager was known as the Commandant, and this guy, real name Robin Smith, was an actor from South Africa who Bret Hart met during a WWF tour. Bret recommended that Robin got in touch with the WWF to get some work, and Robin became the manager of the Truth Commission in the USWA. In the USWA, the final version of the Truth Commission included Recon, Sniper, the Interrogator, and Tank. Recon is better known as Bill Buchanan. Sniper done some jobber work in the WWF but found more success in the Catch Wrestling Association during the late 80s and 90s. The Interrogator would end up better known as Kurgan, and as for Tank, fans would know him better as Mantar. When the Truth Commission made their way to the WWF, Tank was featured only twice on Shotgun Saturday Night before he got released. So the Truth Commission that showed up on Raw only had 3 members. 4 if you include their manager, the Commandant. Still, the Commission had won their first match on WWF Raw, meaning the company had another new faction among their roster. Immediately after this debut Raw match, Faarooq battled Crush, and of course, the match ended in a disqualification when the Nation and the DOA began fighting among themselves. Los Boricuas also joined in. At SummerSlam 1997, an 8-man tag took place, the Disciples of Apocalypse vs Los Boricuas. Neither the Nation nor the Commission were booked on this show, but the Nation did show up during this tag match. Ahmed Johnson effectively cost DOA the match, and guess what happens afterwards? Go, just guess. If you thought a big fight broke out between the 3 teams, then you'd be absolutely right. The reactions for these brawls started off quite well, but as time went on, the audience got less and less enthused. You can't blame them either, really. There needed to be a shake-up, and a shake-up happened the next night on Raw when Ahmed Johnson was attacked by the Nation, ending his association with the group. The backstage reasons for Ahmed leaving the Nation are unknown, but we do know 2 things for sure. Ahmed was quite injury prone during his WWF run, and the company wanted to move a different superstar into the Nation. I don't care what anyone thinks though, I thought the heel Ahmed Johnson was a good addition to the Nation of Domination. Fans rip into Ahmed for his promos, and to be fair, he wasn't exactly Ricky Steamboat inside the ropes, but I thought Ahmed joining the Nation was the best thing he could have done at that time. Kicking him out of the faction meant Johnson was back to square one really, and he didn't last much longer in the World Wrestling Federation afterwards. Later on in the same episode of Raw, Ahmed's replacement was revealed. Rocky Maivia was now part of the Nation of Domination. The following week, while Rocky explained his actions, the DOA challenged the Nation to a parking lot brawl. The Nation accepted, and during the fight, the Boricuas stole the DOA's motorcycles. In Your House Ground Zero featured a triple threat match pitting the leaders of the Nation, the DOA and Los Boricuas against each other. This match could have ended the Gang Wars, and maybe it should have, but it didn't. Crush vs Savio vs Faarooq was the third match on the card, and Savio Vega surprised everyone by winning the match when he pinned Crush. Around this time too, another stable was introduced to WWF fans consisting of Shawn Michaels, Triple H, Chyna and Ravishing Rick Rude. The group was known as D-Generation X, and while DX would mainly feud with the Hart Foundation and The Undertaker, they'd soon get themselves involved in this gang war very briefly, but more on that in a moment. At In Your House Bad Blood, the Nation of Domination, consisting of D'Lo, Kama and Rocky, were able to defeat the Legion of Doom in a handicap match, while the Disciples of Apocalypse defeated Los Boricuas in an 8-man tag. Faarooq again failed to win a big singles title when he was defeated by Owen Hart for the vacant Intercontinental Championship. Stone Cold Steve Austin was hell-bent on winning the title back from Owen after the King of Hearts injured the Rattlesnake at SummerSlam, so Austin cost Faarooq the IC title in order to get a match against Owen Hart. The whole Gang Wars thing would then begin getting featured even more heavily in the run-up to the 1997 Survivor Series. The event itself had the tagline of Gang Rules, and the poster for the event featured silhouettes of the DOA. The night after Bad Blood, the Truth Commission were back on Raw, acting as lumberjacks for a match pitting the Headbangers against the Godwins, only this time the Commission's original manager, the Commandant, was nowhere to be seen. The Jackal, better known as Don Callis, was now leading the faction, and apparently Vince McMahon brought in Don Callis because the Commandant wasn't able to take bumps. Callis saw himself as a wrestler and not a manager, but he still went ahead with this and he became part of the Truth Commission. Anyway, the Nation of Domination and the DOA also served as lumberjacks, and the match ended in another massive fight. Elsewhere on Raw, the rivalry between DX and the Harts was really beginning to heat up, seeing as Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were scheduled to face each other at Survivor Series, so faction warfare was definitely the flavour of the month. The 13th of October episode of Raw featured Owen Hart of the Hart Foundation taking on Kama Mustafa of the Nation. DX provided commentary for the matchup, and when Shawn Michaels provoked Bret Hart, the Hitman went to launch an attack, but the Hart Foundation were stopped by the Nation. This led to the Nation attacking the Harts while DX laughed and made fun of the whole situation. The Truth Commission battled DOA afterwards, and there was no clear winner. The match was thrown out after another brawl took place. The next episode of Raw though was when DX and the Harts seriously got involved in this angle, and the stuff that went down probably wouldn't fly today, but let's take a look. Michael Cole reveals that the Nation of Domination's locker room had been vandalised. Graffiti on the walls indicate that the Hart Foundation was responsible, and the graffiti on the walls was also of a racist nature. Faarooq comes out and he completely rips into Vince McMahon at the commentary table, saying that this is completely out of order, and then the Nation of Domination show up. Faarooq cuts a promo where he says he's always known the WWF had problems with black superstars, and the leader of the Nation then calls out Bret. Bret Hart comes out and a match begins. Shawn and Hunter show up and they provide commentary again. And when Bret tries to attack Shawn, the Heartbreak Kid hides behind the Nation of Domination. DX gets out of harm's way and the match continues. And after a brawl between the Harts and the Nation and interference from Stone Cold Steve Austin, Bret Hart is able to pin Faarooq and gain a victory. A little later on, Bret attacked HBK after Shawn's match with Owen Hart, and Raw ended with a brawl between the DOA, the Godwins, and the Truth Commission. Brett explained the next week that it was DX who vandalised the Nation's dressing room and not the Hart Foundation. And during this explanation, DX showed up on the Titantron and apparently DX had overheard the Hart Foundation using the N-word while they wrecked the dressing room. This makes the Nation go after the Harts again. DX were clearly using the Nation to get at the Hart Foundation and the Nation were falling for it. To be honest though, the Nation versus the Harts was way more interesting than the Nation versus DOA or Nation versus Boricuas. That whole thing already felt a little played out by this point. But any lasting rivalry between the Nation and the Harts was never on the cards, seeing as Bret Hart would be leaving the WWF following Survivor Series. We all know what happens there, so let's refocus on the Gang Wars aspect of the pay-per-view. The Truth Commission had a traditional Survivor Series match against the DOA, while the Nation had a match against LOD, Ahmed Johnson and Ken Shamrock. The Boricuas were oddly completely absent from the show, while DX and the Harts were split up into different matches throughout the night. The Truth Commission defeated the Disciples of Apocalypse, with Kurgan being the sole survivor, while the Nation of Domination were defeated in their Survivor Series match. Ken Shamrock eliminated The Rock to win the whole match. For a pay-per-view that promised a collision between the gangs of the World Wrestling Federation and a possible end to the faction warfare that totally dominated most of the WWF's programming, it kinda felt like a letdown. Crush ended up leaving the World Wrestling Federation a few weeks after the Survivor Series. A big rumour was that Bryan Adams left the company because of the Montreal Screwjob, but Charles Wright said recently that this wasn't the case. His exit had nothing to do with Bret Hart's treatment at the Survivor Series. Still, the DOA had lost their leader, although they did still carry on as a faction. While the DOA found themselves a man down, the Nation would get themselves a new member at the beginning of 1998, when the world's strongest man, Mark Henry, joined the group. While we're here, we might as well wrap up the whole Truth Commission thing too. Kurgan ended up getting a small push, and the Jackal, in storyline, began favouring Kurgan over the other members of the Truth Commission. Recon and Sniper would form a tag team named Armageddon, but they were released shortly afterwards. And as for Kurgan and the Jackal, they would eventually end up becoming part of the Oddities faction. The Jackal was the initial member or founder of the group. From here, Callis introduced a new tag team named the Acolytes that featured the Nation's Faarooq. Los Boricuas continued on as a team also, but they were used mainly as job guys. Savio Vega did get quite a big moment when he was revealed as Shawn Michaels' replacement during a 4-on-4 tag team main event match at No Way Out 1998, although this reveal didn't excite fans at all at the pay-per-view. I'm sure most would agree that Savio Vega was a very competent professional wrestler, but he's also no Shawn Michaels' replacement. Savio ended up getting badly injured in the WWF Brawl for All tournament, and Vega didn't reappear on WWF television shows until July of 1999. Vega would only work dark matches while also appearing on the Super Astros show. Just to go back to No Way Out 1998 for a moment, what was left of the DOA teamed up with Ken Shamrock and Ahmed Johnson to do battle with the Nation of Domination on this show. Problems were brewing within the Nation, with The Rock getting a little big for his boots and Faarooq was getting tired of it. When Rock tapped out to Ken Shamrock's ankle lock, Rocky and Faarooq had an argument inside the ring, and it looked like the Nation was about to implode. You can learn more about all this stuff in my Rock and the Nation video. And that was it really for the Gang Wars of 1997. If I talked about the subject anymore, I'd just be listing off a bunch of wins and losses, many of which happening on B shows. The Nation would end up getting revamped again under The Rock, Faarooq would find himself tagging with Bradshaw, and the remaining members of the DOA and Boricuas would drift around the mid-card until the groups were disbanded. The big faction battle that dominated 1998 featured the Nation taking on DX, and while both factions were quite different in comparison to 1997, there was a lot more impact of this battle of the factions because there wasn't multiple groups getting involved, and also there was no real undercard or job guys on either faction. I'd like to say I enjoyed the Nation versus DOA versus Boricuas stuff of 1997, but honestly, I only cared about the Nation really, and I get the impression that many fans might have felt the same way. But do let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's a topic that isn't discussed too often. Anyway, thank you very much for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and take care. A big thanks to George Cox on Patreon for requesting this video. I have 2 Patreon Hall of Famers to shout out this week, Tyree and Jesse. Tyree can be found on YouTube at his channel Tyree Holmes Games 112, where he's currently playing through the new Ratchet & Clank game on PS5. And pro wrestling referee Jesse can be found on Twitch. The channel name is CFG South. A big thanks to Jesse, Tyree and everyone else helping out over on Patreon.